Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week, we are talking all about how to deal with negative people. Now, if there are certain negative people in your life that leave you drained and exhausted, it can often seem like a kind of mental or emotional battle with them that really drags you down. Now, often these people are labeled narcissistic, toxic, or even energy vampires, but are such labels actually helpful for you in terms of how you handle them better? Well, in this teaching, we'll be showing you how you can fully retake control of your energy, your mind, and emotions so you can effectively handle anybody who crosses your path with calm, ease, and flow. Okay, David. So negative people, I'm pretty sure everybody has encountered or maybe even has someone in their life that they would class as a negative person. How is it that we get so kind of worked up, so exhausted, so drained by these type of individuals?
Yes, Alex, this is a tricky subject, and we'll have to go through this a little bit slowly. Because when you encounter a person who's giving you negative views and negative ideas and CCJing you, criticizing, comparing, and being judgmental against you, you're at the receiving end of what we call in our model emotional manipulation. They are emotionally manipulating you or trying to emotionally manipulate you. That's why our teachings are so important. It's grounding yourself not in emotions, but grounding yourself in the stability of Shen, who you really are. That would we talk about, and we've done many teachings on Shen, that inspiration. I love that word, inspiration, being in your spirit, being grounded, being connected to your truth, honesty, and integrity, because it's almost like you're being kind of called out, the manipulation to called out on an emotional level. And so in a way, you've got to be even stronger and connected, not to your emotions, but to your Shen, the truth of the situation.
So I would think that often these people are perhaps negative about us, but they can just be negative in general, kind of expecting the worst, have a downer on everything. And their general attitude and vibe is very down. And it's like, for the most part, we can want to engage with them or we need to engage with them. And if they are down on themselves, if we're sensitive, compassionate people, we want to help them too. And it's like, how do we find the balance between grounding ourselves in our true, our Shen, our spirituality, our inner truth, and not getting dragged along by them, but also still connecting with them, still empathizing with them, still interacting with them? Because for the most part, we have to still interact in some way.
That's why I said it's a tricky subject, because it's even more tricky than that, Alex, because it falls into two categories. You've got the one category, which perhaps we'll talk about first, and then the even more complicated one. So the first category are friends, colleagues, acquaintances, people at work, people you have to interact with, maybe someone you have to do business with. And as you quite rightly said, they're always looking at the worst case scenario. The things we talk about in our videos. And you're on the receiving end of this, always finding fault, always criticizing, always comparing, never happy, never finding a resolution, never satisfied. And that's really difficult. And we'll go into that one first. And then the second one, which will have to take a little bit more time, is family members, members of your family, brothers, mothers, fathers, maybe partners, who are also playing this emotional manipulation game. So let's deal with the easier one. So the easy one, the answer to your question is you have to be very grounded, and you have to consider, is it your responsibility to try and change their outlook on life and the situation? Can you separate yourself a little bit? And that will be different for everyone, because if it's a colleague at work, and maybe a boss or maybe somebody under you that is very negative and always finding fault and always doing that big sigh and dropping and saying, oh, this is really hard and I'm finding this difficult and will never succeed. If that's a colleague, then you've got to kind of find a way to work with that colleague and to be able to inspire them with your truth. And sometimes that can happen and sometimes it can't. But the main thing, as you said in the introduction, you cannot let them drain you, because they are like, a lot of my clients will use that word that you used in the introduction. It's a great visualization, emotional vampires. And it's almost, if you allow them to suck your energy away, and they can bring you down. They can make any task look much harder, much more difficult. It often seems to me as though you're dragging a weight. You've got a situation, an event, a problem you have to solve, a challenge. And instead of facing the challenge and being responsive and being positive, they're constantly chipping away, looking at the negatives, saying things like, oh, it's my job to find fault. I've got to think about all the bad things that may happen. That's my responsibility. But there's a way to do that, not in a negative way, but in a positive way. So what's the solution to these people? So to these people, you have to be very grounded in your Shen, because you will have to be able to talk to them not on an emotional level. You cannot let them drag you down to their level, because they're pulling you into that emotional quicksand. You've got to be able to say, yes, I understand what you're saying, and that could be an outcome. All the things we say on the teachings here, but that's only one outcome. Let's also investigate all of the other outcomes that we could be addressing and looking at. So you have to be very connected. I can't think of the word. You can't be in their emotions. You can't let them drag you down into the emotions. You've got to look at the bigger picture.
David, I think that makes sense, but I can see for a lot of people whose core beliefs or whose inner child, their kind of ego is driven by a need to make things better, to people please, to support other people when they see them upset or struggling, because they don't like any upset or any emotions in their environment. It will feel groundingly hard to step away from the emotions and the complaints of that other person.
Exactly, Alex. And that's where the work can be done. And that's why I was going to move on to, don't try and change that person, because you can't. They're not asking you to change them. They're not saying, can you please help me with this negative outlook? The only person that can change here is you. You have to take that self-assurance and self-responsibility to look after yourself, because these people are out there. They're all around you, and you can't be blown and sucked into their negativity as all of the time. So the work is here, rather than trying to change them, is to really focus on yourself and really strengthen this idea, as you said. If it's people pleasing, that's where you should work. If it's trying to be compassionate and help people out of their negativity, you've got to be realistic here and to say, is it my job to step into a colleague or a friend and sort them out? Are they even asking me to do that? And in my experience, they're not even asking you. They've just built up this story. We talk about the story. They've built up this story of looking for negativity, finding fault, because it makes them seem a little bit cleverer. They're always fine. If you give them a solution, the first thing they do is not look at the solution. They look at the things that can find fault with the solution to pull you down. And that's why I said at the very beginning, the way to do this with the first set of characters is for you to be very grounded, very solid in what you believe, and very focused in what you're doing. And this is why the inner child work and all of the teachings that we do is focused on that. Concentrate on yourself. And I know what you're thinking, because this is how I used to think when I was a child. But David, surely this is selfish. Isn't it selfish to concentrate on you? No, it's not selfish, because you have to value yourself. You have to give yourself that technique to not let these persons pull you down to their level. And that is really important for you as a person.
And David, I would think that the story of these individuals is often, as I say, I need to be negative, or it can be often like a poor me story or victim story. And they really, although they can often complain, reach out for help, actually, for not everyone, for a lot of these people, they just want to stay stuck. But so you can keep piling attention, energy, effort, care onto them, and it will never be enough. And in a way, it kind of fuels them to dig in harder, because it's almost like they're playing one game and you think you're working on another game. And so there's never a harmonious matching going on. And the point about putting yourself first, being self-focused, is not selfish. And that's really the Taoist teaching that you talk about of Chiang. It doesn't mean withdrawing from the other person in terms of your compassion, sensitivity, effort, but it means giving yourself compassion, sensitivity, and effort first and foremost, so that you've got something to give other people.
Well, it's a couple of things there, Alex. So what you said at the beginning was very important, because for what you demonstrated was what we call the carousel of despair. And that carousel of despair has almost like a gravity that sucks you in. So they're running the carousel of despair, and you cannot be dragged in. And so you have to find a linguistic vocabulary, a way to address these people. And it may be something saying, I'm just really right off the top of my head, oh, thank you for giving me all of the positives. I've made a note of all that. Now, could you give me some... Sorry, let me rephrase that. Thank you for giving me all of the negatives. I've made a note of those. Now, could you give me equal amount of positives? And so it's finding a technique that you can use, this language. I deal with this. A lot of my clients, when they first start to work with me, are extremely negative and looking at all the worst case scenarios. And you have to find a language that gets over that emotional hurdle and talks to them. Because as you said quite rightly, they're a great person. They are submerged in this circle of negativity, and you cannot be pulled down into that quicksand, because you'll be in them drowning the same as they're drowning.
And David, I think, when you said about acknowledging the kind of concerns or worries or negatives, but then saying, well, can we look at other options, other possibilities, positives? I think for a lot of people, the negative people we're talking about, they would be quite shocked and taken aback by that, particularly if you have engaged with them in a way that is not questioned what they're saying before. And it'll either shock them so much that they'll just turn their attention to somebody else, because actually they don't want to talk about positives. They don't want to open their mind to other possibilities, in which case that they were game playing. They weren't really looking for answers. But if they do start to actively engage in a different kind of conversation, broaden it out, then this person genuinely wants help. It's not just about laying down lots of negatives and moaning about them. They do want to find a way forward here, and I can help them.
Yes, It was interesting because that solution came into my mind as we were developing this subject, because it's quite a difficult and tricky tightrope to walk this, because people would say, well, just walk away from them, just ignore them. And that's no good either, because these are potentially very intelligent and clever people, but they just stuck on their own carousel. And that solution came to me from I was working several years ago to a company, with a company and with their managing director, and this was the problem that he was having. His managers were always bickering and arguing about the negativity, problems. They saw it as problem finding. They would find a problem, even if the problem didn't exist. They would find it, and we came up with this solution. Please. Do your presentation, but for every negative, you have to also give me a positive. It has to be equal. And he reckoned within a month that changed all of his managers, the way they're speaking, the way they're thinking, the way they're talking, and all of his management meetings then suddenly started to turn. This is the way he described it for me. It was very difficult at the beginning, but then the wheel stopped and then it reversed. Then it turned back. And then they wasn't talking so much about the negative. They began talking about the positive and the possibilities, because you change that around. And so that's why you have to be grounded. If you're dealing with this with colleagues at work or friends who are constantly looking for negative outcomes, it's very easy to either be dragged into that negative outcome or go the opposite way in the pendulum and be dismissive of them and move away from them. And the Wu Wei is to find a way to address that. And it's about, first of all, what you think, connecting to your Shen. And then secondly, for you, discovering a new language, a new set of linguistics that you can, first of all, acknowledge, yes, I can see that could be a potential problem. Could you put a percentage on that problem? Is that 1%? Is that 100%? And so it's finding that different technique of dealing with that person to bring them out.
And I think through communicating different ways for them to how you're going to handle them and how they should maybe look at their situation, that's in effect you're setting down better, healthier boundaries for yourself. So it could be trying to alter the way in which you communicate. So rather than just taking on the negativity without question, kind of suggesting to them to widen their perspective, to reframe as a kind of form of boundary setting in effect for yourself, which is in effect saying, I'm no longer going to engage in the way that I used to, which was just to take everything on or to kind of rush to help without question. But if they don't change, if they don't respond, then I guess the next level of boundary setting is to say, I don't think I can help you with this, or for you to just withdraw to some degree, whether it's withdrawing, kind of chit-chatting with them so much, or managing more in a more controlled way how and when you interact with these individuals. So again, it's an act of self-preservation, but it's done consciously in an appropriate way. But if the communication change doesn't work, then you have to think about managing your time and how you actually physically interact with, whether it's a friend or a colleague.
Yes, and I think that takes us back to the beginning of this section when I talked about Shen. Shen to me is the most important thing that you have to do for yourself. You have to connect to that truth, honesty, and integrity. You have to find that inner voice, that inspiration, because for you, you may have to develop a new set of statements of the way you address these people, the words you use, the tone that you use. And so you need to connect to that inspiration inside of you, because there's, in a way, strangely enough, this could help you, because there are many, many, many negative people out there. And for you to find a way that you can dig down into you, connect to your Shen, be inspired, that you can rise above it and you can deal with it with a much wider perception, as you quite rightly said. Because remember, what the negative person is trying to do is to narrow the possession down to, it's my way, it's a disaster, it's going to fail, look at all these problems, I'm going to get hurt here, this is not going to work out. And so what you have to do is to try to be able to open up that conversation with them and widening it out. And with this first group, this is much easier because they're not family. I know we're going to talk about the second group as in a minute, but this is much easier because you're not so emotionally connected to them. And then that goes on to what you say. It allows you to keep that little bit of distance. But I would also use it as a little exercise for you, to raise yourself up, to be more inspirational, to be more in your spirit, to come up with better ideas, better language, better ways to run meetings, better conversations with your friends. How to deal with that will raise you up and bring you more into your flow, bring you more into your Wu Wei. And so then you can use this in other parts of your life. When you meet other negative people or negative situations, you're the person that can be able to flow around the rocks. We talk about the water coming down the stream. You can find a way around, find a solution, find a way to deal with your challenges in life, and using that same inspiration of your share.
And so I like this idea of being, rather than kind of reaching to explicitly support or engage with someone, to support or engage them indirectly by being the best person you can be, by being an example to them. So whether it's a friend, a work colleague, a neighbor, the people in this set of people that we're talking about, if you can look within, question if you are triggered emotionally by these sorts of people, if your emotions, you are allowing your emotions to get triggered, asking yourself why, consciously reconnecting to and grounding yourself within, and then consciously, I guess, becoming more acutely aware of, am I rushing to people please here? Am I rushing to help when help's not being asked for? So it's almost like these individuals are great teachers for us because they are shining a mirror against some of our inner child tendencies, to rush to be emotionally engaged, when actually we can do some inner inquiry work, we can stand stronger, and we can be that inspirational person. And then what they choose to do with that is their business, and we need to accept that. And that's a big thing, isn't it? We need to accept that that's their journey.
Exactly, and that's why I believe at the heart of all these Wu Wei teachings is the spirituality. But you used a very interesting term just at the beginning there. You said emotionally triggered. And so if anyone, you want to use that term, they, him, she, emotionally triggers me, this is the opportunity for you to do the golden thread, to find out why. Because remember, I'm going to say this on every video, it's very important to our teaching. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim of them. Just to clarify, I'm not saying you shouldn't have emotions. I'm not saying emotions are wrong. I'm not saying you should be emotional void. But if you're creating the emotion, surely we should know what is the thought and the belief that creates the emotion. So as you said at the opening of the conclusion for this section, if somebody is pressing your buttons, emotionally triggering you, they are actually your great teacher, because now you can say, what is it about what they do, they say, they act, that I now create this emotion of anger, frustration, anxiety, resentment, whatever you want to call it. I call it a red light emotion, but that's your opportunity to do the golden thread. And if you look in our archives, we've done many, many teachings of the golden thread. It's just a self-discovery to find what the thought, what the belief is that's creating the emotion. And then that allows you to deal with the person in a different way.
And I can put links in the show notes to other teachings we've done on managing triggers or understanding triggers, managing them, and also healthy boundary setting. Before we move on to the next group of people, so people that we're more intimately connected to, I just wanted to ask you about this concept of labels. Mm-hmm. So, as I said in the introduction, often these type of people with negative attitudes can be labeled as narcissistic, toxic, energy vampires. But I do wonder whether such labels, although I guess it helps us mark them out in a way and be more mindful that we have to kind of be more acutely aware of how they're affecting us and how we manage them. So that's a good thing. But are these labels labeling the whole person? Does it create more of a problem? Does it make it more difficult for us to manage them in some way?
I think absolutely it does. I think I understand as human beings, we have to use labels, names to identify things. It's totally okay. But I think you have to be careful. And the examples that you use, narcissistic and all these labels, what happens, you stop concentrating on what they're doing and you tend to label the person. And this is where it goes wrong. So I agree with you. You have to be extremely careful. The label can be very powerful. That's why in our model, when clients come to us with anxiety, stress, tension, fear, scared, I would prefer them to call it a red light feeling. And that seems a little bit pedantic and not important. But the word anxiety or the word fear or the word scared or the word vulnerable creates an image in your mind, and particularly for the inner child, that's strengthening the inner child's view and story. And so, as you said, if you label somebody as a narcissist, you're labeling the whole person instead of saying what they're doing is very negative. They have a very negative speak. And what that separation does, it allows you to deal with it much more effectively because you're not trying to label the person and be judgmental. Because what we're trying to do here in this instance is saying the teaching about CCJ, criticizing, comparing, or being judgmental. And what I'm advising, don't be judgmental about the person. Make a judgment about their actions. And so therefore, it's the distinct difference between being judgmental and making a judgment. You can judge what they say and what they act and what they do, but you're not judging the person. And what that does, as we said earlier, that allows you to get that little bit of separation to allow you to connect to your Shen and rise you above it. Because rather than judging the person, you can look at their actions. So judge their actions, judge their words, judge what they do, but don't be judgmental about them as a human being.
And so I like the way, because we're still empowered, we can still be discerning, we can still take appropriate action, we can still set appropriate boundaries and communicate more effectively if we make a judgment on their behavior, their actions, their attitude. But am I right in thinking what you're saying is, David, if we judge the whole person by labeling the whole person, it's counterproductive because we're effectively playing their game again. We're effectively coming at them from our ego, from our inner child, rather than from our Shen. And what we're trying to do is to be more grounded in our Shen, to be more authentic in our attitude to ourselves and them. And by labeling them, by dismissing the whole person, we separate from Shen.
Exactly correct, Alex. I can only add one little thing about that is you're absolutely right. When you label them, when you're judgmental about them, what your inner child is trying to do is to put you above them. They are a human being, the same as you. They may be going through different set of circumstances. They may have a different history. They may have a different background. Please make a judgment about their actions, about what they do and what they say, but try and refrain from CCJing them, because once you go into the superior inferior mode, as you quite rightly says, this creates more problems for you than it creates for them.
And I think almost like a fundamental teaching when we're talking about how to handle people with negative attitudes. Okay, David, so let's move on to the second, more tricky set of people. So family members, romantic partners, husbands and wives. We can't just walk away from them. We can't just drop them and leave them stranded. But how do we help ourselves in these situations?
Yes, this is why I try to separate these two, because this category is very tricky, because at the same time, you can create a very strong emotional feeling of love for a person. Could be a parent, could be a brother, could be a partner, but you dislike the way they're always criticizing, always complaining, always moaning, always finding fault. And so this is much more tricky and difficult. The principle is the same as what we've just been doing, but it's a lot more like the water gets much muddier here now, because they're the person that you're sharing your life with. They might be the father of your children, the mother of your children, the mother that's trying her best. You can see her trying her best, or a father that's stuck in their own ego and going around. It might be that they believe, parents sometimes believe, that criticism is the best way to encourage you. So it could be lots of things that are going on. So the principle is exactly the same, but more complicated to put into action, because you have this very strong and correctly created feeling of love for them. They're your wife, they're your husband, they're your partner, they're your brother, they're your sister. And so you have this very difficult balance that you have to acknowledge the strong and right feeling of love, but you also have to connect to your Shen, and you have to change and widen your perception so you can change the language, the linguistic that you speak to them.
And I think, David, there's another layer there as well, in addition to the stronger emotional feelings of love. With family members, there is a history and a dynamic there. You know, your beliefs about yourselves as an individual, where you sit within the family hierarchy, past traumas, all that sort of stuff are tied into this. So even though you may not strongly love a parent or a sibling or another family member, because of perhaps everything that's gone on in your life up to date, it's almost like they are intrinsically linked to your hot buttons, to your triggers, to your beliefs about yourselves, and they play into that, or you allow them to play into that.
You know, Alex, as we start to develop this second part, I almost think it'd be a good idea to do a video just on this by itself. How do you deal with a negative, loving member of your family? I think it's so involved, because as you quite rightly said, the more you dig into this, the more you'll see the layers start to unfold. We will have covered all of this, because the ones you've just said now is about value and worth. So if you do not believe that you have intrinsic value and worth, and you are looking externally for others to give you value and worth and appreciation and love, this is going to be much more difficult for you, because in this group, these are the members of your intimate family that you believe are biologically programmed to support you, to be there for you, not to keep on criticizing you, again, what we call CCJ. But I can tell you from my experience of doing this job, many parents and sometimes partners will believe that they'll get the best from their partner by criticizing, by being judgmental, by comparing, by saying, you know, oh, look at their car, our car's not so good. Oh, look at your job. Look how much you're earning. Look how much he's earning. We're not delivering. And they believe that somehow, misguidedly, that's going to inspire their partner to do better or do more. When it does the opposite, it brings you down. So this has many layers of this cake, and many different, and that's why it has to come back down to you. It's almost like the same as we said at the beginning. It has to come down to what all our teachings about you being accountable, you being self-sufficient, you being grounded in your value, in your worth, you honoring your spirituality, you believing in yourself. So it always comes down to that same thing. But when it's coming from family, it's much more difficult.
I think, David, that, the motivations for these individuals to do what they do, act how they act, and the motivation for how we respond to them. So if we want to people please, if we want to prove ourselves, if we don't want to disappoint them, if we're hypersensitive to their moods, and then the principles of how we should effectively deal with these individuals, so family members, partners, it kind of all the same as what we've talked about before, but it's just like everything's more amplified.
Exactly.
Everything is stronger, rawer, more challenging, because it really cuts to the heart of us, to the heart of our understanding about who we are, about what we owe to other people or not owe, how we can help other people, but where the appropriate boundaries are. It's like if we ever want a test of our inner resolve and our inner grounding and our inner knowing, it's when we're in a situation dealing with, say, a negative family member who is constantly criticizing us still all these years later, or constantly stuck in their own negative story and expecting us to run along with it and allow them to wallow in it. It kind of presses at all our emotions and all our beliefs about ourselves.
You're absolutely right, Alex. And I think this would be the most common and recurring things that I work with my clients. This is very complicated, very involved. Because, for instance, if you and it also puts the spotlight on your inner child. This is when you'll really understand how your inner child operates. I'll give you for instance. Just imagine that you've been wanting to gain favor and make your dad proud of you all of your life. And this may be right from a child, where your dad has got the idea that it's a good idea to criticize you and never be quite happy. You'd be the type that comes home with, 98 out of 100, and your father looks at you and says, well, why didn't you get 100? I told you you're lazy. You're not, And so what happens all through the life, that's the inner child. And even though you may be an adult, but just the way the father looks at you sometimes, I have clients just to say, and I say, surely they don't say that. And they say, no, of course they don't say, but I know what they're thinking. And they just look at me in a certain way. So as I said, this cake has many, many layers, which really focuses on what we work on, really, on this Wu Wei wisdom, is finding your inner child, trying to understand what your inner child is trying to achieve. But this part about CCJing, about being negative, and as you quite rightly said, living now, even though you're grown up, but still having a parent who you love, but they're very negative. It doesn't matter what you did for them. It doesn't matter how far you went for them. It doesn't matter how many times you went and visited them. It would never be enough. You can never please them. And so that's why, again, the principle is the same. The mud is much more, the water is much more muddied, but the principle is the same. It's about you getting grounded in what you can do and accepting what you can do and accepting where they are as well.
And so, David, I'm kind of thinking that we can set appropriate boundaries. We can try to widen out the conversation, the perspective of the other person. They may not like it, but we can hold our ground with that. So we can do all those things, the techniques we've talked about. But I'm kind of sensing that all the while we really need to do this deeper inner work, particularly when it comes to family inner members, because when we start to set boundaries, start to change the way in which we communicate with these individuals or how we share our time with them, Our inner child will really dislike it because it will say, oh, this feels wrong. I feel like I'm being cruel. I feel like I'm being hurtful. I feel like I'm disappointing them. They may even say, you're no good. You're useless. Why are you doing this? And that's really going to trigger and affect our inner child. So we have to do the work, the inner child work, with which we've got so many teachings on, and I can share links in the show notes, to get completely self-assured about the fact that we are good enough, that we are lovable, that we can cope with changing how we interact with these people, despite how they may react to our all of a sudden starting to put down boundaries.
Yes, and I couldn't agree with you more. It really is focusing on your inner child in this section more than the other section, because the inner child will come into play here more. And it's what we call reparenting. You have to reparent your inner child. That means doing the golden thread, going down to what the inner child, it will always be looking externally for value, for worth, get strokes, get approval from whoever it is. It may be their parents, it may be their siblings, it may be their partner, looking for people outside of themselves in authority. And as I said, when I work with my clients on this very tricky subject, I think this is one of the most difficult ones, when you've got a highly critical parent, partner, and how you don't let him bring you down. You've got to do the golden thread. You've got to get down to your inner child. We've got to help the inner child work. And as you said, we've done many teachings in the archives. But if you're interested in this, please look at the reparenting teachings on teaching your inner child, because that's what you got to take that responsibility. And I don't see it, and this is what a lot of clients have said to me, that it suddenly becomes a massive change, that you've got to change, and they realize that things are different. It's more as you do the work. Again, as I said in the previous one, the words you use, the way you use the words, the way you are not so quickly triggered into going into an extreme emotion and losing your temper or getting annoyed, getting frustrated, the way you're much calmer in your flow, that in a way will affect them more than saying, right, from now on, I'm only coming to see you on Sunday afternoon for Sunday lunch. That the way you answer the phone, the way you speak to them as on the phone, the way you interact with when you're together, that can have a greater effect on building back this relationship. But here's the killer. This is the killer. You may never stop them being negative. You have to accept that. You have to accept that, but you can't accept that unless you're grounded in your shame. But if you believe that they're suddenly going to change overnight by what you do and drop down at your feet and kiss your feet and say, I'm so sorry, I've been negative to you all your life, it's going to change now, it's never going to happen. But you can change. You can change your response. And again, this is why we do these teachings. You can change your response. So their negativity, like the old classic saying, is like a water off a duck's back. You just smile and you say, okay, Dad, okay, Mum, if that's what you think, that's fine. And when we can get you to that stage, then the emotions have changed. And then they have to change, because now their negativity, their comments, their comparing, their judgmental is having no effect on you. And that's the way out of this maze.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. And as I say, I will put links in the show notes to some of the other teachings we've done to help you with this subject. I hope this teaching has provided some insight for you. Please do let us know and perhaps share it with someone else who you think may also benefit from it. David works every week with clients all over the world on exactly these sorts of issues and family dynamics and relationship issues. If you'd like to learn more about David's one-to-one sessions via Zoom, I will put a link in the show notes about those as well. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new teachings every week, and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.